it's the equivalent, in my mind anyways, of like, if you've got a whole bunch of people living in a house or like an apartment building, and it's on the edge of an eroding cliff, and the work that's underway is moving that entire apartment complex to a better place, replacing the foundation, replacing the plumbing because it's all like lead pipes, replacing all the electrical because it's knob and tube, and doing it while people are still living in the building and they don't even really know it's happening.
Hello, Thunderbird family, and welcome to episode 2 of the ThunderCast. Before we jump into the show, I wanted to thank everybody out there for all of your largely very positive feedback about the first episode and the format, and we really appreciate your support there. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you for sharing it, and thank you for all of your encouragement. This episode is a special one because it marks our first special guest. This time, we are joined by Mike Conley, Principal Software Engineer at Mozilla. Do I have that right?
That is correct.
And, of course, Ryan Sipes.
Good to have in a second episode.
Alex could not be with us tonight, but that is because he is doing excellent work polishing up Supernova, Thunderbird 115 tonight, so we had to grudgingly let him keep working tonight. So, Mike, before you tell us what you do for Mozilla with Firefox, I wanted to hear your origin story, if you have one, if you remember it. I do. Like your tech origin story, or what made you fall in love with computers, or made you fall in love with technology.
Yeah, I can do that. That's a great question. So, I grew up in the 90s. I was born in the late 80s, but I grew up in the 90s, and my parents got us a computer when I was a kid. I think my mom worked in an office, and they were like throwing out a bunch of old computers, and she was like, "Oh, I'll snag this one," and she brought it home. And so I had this old computer, like running DOS, MS-DOS. There was no hard drives, like those two 5.25 floppy drive bays. And I'm booting DOS off a disk to play like Reader Rabbit. Like that was a lot of my childhood. And I got really into the Quest games from Sierra. Like my uncle brought a bunch of discs, and then it's got like Space Quest and King's Quest. I got really into like the old Sierra text parser adventure games. And then like I wanted to learn how to make those sorts of games. And my uncle and my aunt and my uncle are both computer scientists, and they got me a book on BASIC. I learned how to write very simple games in BASIC. GW BASIC is what I started with. And it was like, I learned how to make a 3-shell game based on this like book from the 80s that my uncle gave me that listed out like, go sub this, now do that, like input $sign, like all that stuff. Like I
remember writing that code. I didn't understand it, but I was just copying it out of magazines and stuff.
Exactly. Just copying stuff out and then changing some of the strings to make it like say my name, and like I'm so proud that it's like putting my name in there. Like it asks my name and it says hello to me and it ends. And that was like the greatest thing ever as like a 10-year-old or something. I don't remember how old I was. I was pretty young. All right, fast forward a little bit. We get a more advanced computer. I think it ran like the first Windows 95. We had Windows 95, and it was like a revolution in the household. Like suddenly we had a mouse. Like that was a big deal. And at some point we got access to the internet, and I was able to play more games on the computer. I played a game called like Simon the Sorcerer and Monkey Island, and like all of these more graphical mouse-oriented point-and-click adventure games that I was also really interested in wanting to build. And I got hooked into this like online community that built stuff in a variant of BASIC called QBasic, or Quick Basic, I think it was. In particular, Quick Basic 4.5. And there was this whole subculture on the internet and forums of people passing around basic programs and like, here, download this .bas file and run it, and it's a game. Or like, I've compiled my game into an executable and you can run it and it's got graphics and like keyboard input. And there were people doing wild stuff in there. Like, there was a fellow, I don't remember his name, but like he built a library that you could import into your programs that used assembler to do really efficient graphics operations. It was called DirectQB. And that was like a really big deal because up until then, like the games that you could make in QBasic you were limited by the performance of the runtime compiler, and the actual compiler to the executable it didn't do like a whole lot of optimization. So this thing changed everything. Suddenly your QBasic games could blit at 60 frames per second. You could do like animation and it didn't look like garbage. It was a revolution. And so I got to kind of like ride the coattails of all these people doing like cutting edge stuff in QBasic in the early to mid 90s. And then I stopped. I stopped for a while. I didn't program for a while. I made like a web page for my band. I play music. I know both of you are musicians, or like you.
And so is Alex. So,
yeah.
Like I'm going to insist at some point we get together. We turn on like, I don't know. We somehow like collaborate online for a theme song or something. I don't know. Just something. We have to make a piece of music together.
Yeah. It seems like there's a pattern here. Like this podcast could quickly pivot into like a musician podcast. It's totally possible. So let's fast forward a little bit. I make a website for my band, and I'm like learning a little bit of simple JavaScript and markup and stuff. But that's about as much programming as I did. I was more of a theater kid in high school. Like I didn't go straight into computer programming or anything. I was like a theater student, and like a guidance counselor in my final year of high school was like, that's a really hard way to make a living. You might want to pivot into something like engineering because we need engineers, and you have more possibility of making like a career out of it as opposed to like trying to scrape by as an artist or something.
I guess that really resonated with you then, right?
Well, I mean, it certainly, I was pragmatic enough to sort of recognize like, yes, that is a true fact. Like I will eventually move out and need to like put food on the table. And like, I recognize that it's difficult for an artist to like put food on the table all the time unless they're teaching. So what I did was my guidance counselor was like, your math skills are pretty good. Why don't you go into electrical and computer engineering? And I was like, oh, that sounds great for the electrical part because I want to build guitar amplifiers. I want to like learn how to build guitar amplifiers because I'd been like messing around with my amp and like blowing it up constantly. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, I want to make it louder. I want to modify, and I wanted to learn what I was actually doing and how I had like miraculously not blown myself up by messing around with my guitar amplifier. I wanted to like understand the theory behind it. And so I went to school. I somehow got into electrical and computer engineering and found out that I was absolutely garbage at the electrical part. Like I basically failed out of that entire program, but I was good enough at the programming parts because, you know, I at least recognized some of it. Like it'd been a while, but I was like, oh, loops. This feels somewhat familiar. Oh, variables. Okay. And so I had some degree of comfort with it. So I pivoted over to computer science and got my degree in computer science. The economy collapsed in 2008. I decided to do grad school because like the job market had collapsed and like things were bad. So I was like, grad school. And my grad supervisor connected me towards the end of that degree with the CEO of the time of Mozilla Messaging. So up until that point, I had not been doing a whole lot of open source development. Like I'd done some like that stuff in QBasic is all open source. Like people are posting the source code and whatnot, but I hadn't been like a dabbler in the open source community. I wasn't like contributing to the kernel or anything like that. Like I didn't know the moves of being in open source. But as soon as I got connected with Mozilla Messaging and I got hired as a contractor for 6 months, then I was like, oh, there's this world of IRC, which we had that with the QBasic community as well. But this was a lot more professional, and this was like full of people with like it was huge. Like there's so many people in the mail dev channel, IRC channel, and I was learning so much about a code base that I knew nothing about. But I was basically hired at the time on my contract was to get Thunderbird to be the default email client on Ubuntu. That was like my primary task for that contract.
Whoa! What year was this?
This was 2011, 2010, something like that. So Evolution was the default.
What a neat connection.
Yeah,
that's so
Mozilla
cool.
Messaging, is the precursor for what we are now.
Yeah, I was there.
That's so awesome.
Towards like the latter half of the existence of Mozilla Messaging. So I fulfilled my duty, like in that I worked with people at Canonical. I figured out what they wanted out of a default email client. We were able to like get the stuff that they needed built out so that they switched to using Thunderbird as the default email client. And I think it's still the case that we're the default email client and the default browser.
It is.
On Ubuntu, which is great.
Yeah.
And then Mozilla Messaging got absorbed by the corporation, and I got absorbed with it. At that point, they were like, we're going to convert you from a contractor to a full-timer if you're interested. And I was like, heck yeah, I'm interested. I've been here ever since. And that was like back in 2011. So I've been here since basically the end of school, and that's my story.
I've never held a job that long.
Yeah.
I've never held a relationship that long. That's really impressive.
There are quite a lot of Mozillans like that I've noticed.
There are a lot of old timers. Part of it is the mission resonates. Like I think, again, like my the number of data points I have to work with is very small. A data point of 1, or data set of 1. But for myself, I can say that the ability to wake up in the morning and not have to like worry about pushing the stock price or like, oh no, the shareholder meeting is coming up and we got to do a thing. Like I get to wake up and think about how we can best fulfill the mission. I am one of those lucky people who doesn't have to drag themselves into work. I get to go like, okay, well, what is the cool thing I'm going to learn about today?
I just think that is truly living the dream.
It super is. And
I mean, I as someone who has had a career with AMD at one point, and then a career as a YouTuber, especially being a YouTuber. I mean, I don't envy anyone who is a YouTuber full time anymore. That is a strenuous, stressful, mentally exhausting job. You can put hours and days and weeks into a video, and if it doesn't pop, if it doesn't find favor with the YouTube algorithm, man, you're just out of luck.
And they make it look so easy. You know, a YouTube video will be so effortless that you don't even realize how much effort went actually into it. How many days and weeks and all of the expertise and the editing and the cropping and the lighting and all this stuff. Yeah.
Okay, but none of your origin story explains to me why your Mastodon profile describes you as a pre-internet phenomenon.
Oh,
can you talk about that?
You know what? I wish I had something more interesting to say. I think I heard someone say that in a sentence, or maybe it was someone on the internet. I heard that phrase, pre-internet phenomenon. I'm like, I kind of fit into that category in that I was pre-internet. Like, I remember the phase in my life where the internet suddenly became a thing. Like, I'm a millennial, and like that's one of the defining characteristics I think of a millennial is like we remember the before times of before the internet was in the house. Pre-internet phenomenon makes me sound like also I can dunk or something, or like I was in Space Jam, but like that is not the case. It was a turn of phrase that I enjoyed, so I threw it into my Mastodon profile.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Because I've been thinking about that a lot lately. The before times, the internet was around. I'm 33, so the internet existed as early as I can remember. I mean, I remember being very small. I don't know how young, and my dad taking me to the computer and clicking the button and connecting to the internet. And I may have even said this in the last podcast. I remember he's like, where do you want to go on the internet? And I remember being like, hotwheels.com. Like, I know that's where I want to go. But to your point, it was years and years until the internet permeated any part of, life in a real meaningful way. I think it was probably like, for me, it was probably like 6th or 7th grade, like being on AIM and MSN Messenger and beginning to chat with people.
Does anyone miss Trillion? Did anyone use Trillion?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a throwback.
Do you remember that? Yeah. I loved that. It's like, no matter what instant messenger I have, they're all in the same application. What a dream that would be today, right?
Was that powered by libpurple?
Yeah, I think it was. I only know that because people bring this up constantly when we talk about Thunderbird.
What you were saying before, Ryan, I remember there's kind of like a change that occurred in like the early 2000s where the internet, for me as a child, was a place that I went to like after dinner I'd log into the dial-up internet and I would go to the internet and then I would end my time on the internet because my sister needs to use the phone or something.
Yeah.
And then now the internet is not a place that I go to. The internet is where I am all the time. Like the internet, I am embedded in the internet. And at I'm going to guess it was right around when the phones happened. But like the internet is now the ether around us as opposed to a place I go to in a box on a desk.
And I miss going to the internet and it being like kind of a production.
Yeah, intentionally going and absorbing something and then walking away and, thinking about it and just enjoying it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. There's easily a Ryan that is like, I use internet like the early 2000s and I only come and sit down at the computer and use the internet and then I leave and I don't have a smartphone. I think about that all the time, actually.
I wonder if we could just sort of partition the internet and like make it, if you go to this protocol or this portion of the internet, it's only like Angel Fire style pages, right? Yeah. I don't know, just some kind of retro version of the internet that we can.
That sounds familiar. There's a couple of things that sound like that. So first of all, dial-up internet is still offered. Like there are people who are still using it that way, which I find fascinating. And for some, I would have presumed.
Are they using it ironically or are they using it out of necessity?
I'm going to presume the latter.
I have some insight here because it's a little older, but I worked for a rural telecom company whenever I started my career in tech. And we had quite a lot of dial-up users. Now, most of them are still rural enough and in the middle of nowhere that they connect via the ubiquity, like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but the long-range radios. Many of them still use dial-up simply because of a number of reasons. Usually they're older people and they don't see the reason to update because they're probably using Windows Mail or Thunderbird on an old computer and they just like click the button, pull down the emails, and that's.
Thank God you can use Thunderbird offline, right?
Yeah,
for real.
But also out of necessity just because of where they live and it's hard to get affordable internet there. There's still parts of America that are that way.
Honest question, like how long would it take to load up any modern web page? How long would it take to load up The Verge or
Facebook,
Mozilla.org or Facebook on a dial-up connection these days?
There is a dev tool in the Firefox dev tools in the network panel. You can simulate, let's see here. You can throttle down to DSL, 4G, 3G, 2G, regular 2G, GPRS.
Keep going.
That's about as good as low as she goes. GPRS.
Not to 56K?
No, it doesn't go down to 56K.
Yeah, I never even got 56K. I didn't have DSL until I went to college. So in 2009, I finally got on the real internet. And before then, I lived on a farm and it was 28.8.
Yeah, I grew up in rural Ontario, and that's what I had. I was jealous of the people who had the 56K modems.
Yeah.
Like, what? Like, you can do what now? You can actually play games on the internet? Like, that's crazy.
I'm sure people loved me because I played Final Fantasy 11, and I know that when I was in a party, first off, it took me like weeks to download the updates, but like when I was in a party with someone, I know I slowed the whole party down. Anyway, that was good. I look back at that fondly, even though it was kind of a terrible time.
I am one of those people who actually played Phantasy Star Online on the Dreamcast with a dial-up modem.
Oh, nice.
With 3 other people around the world. Like, that was possible back then, and it worked.
And was magical. It's still kind of magical, like
yeah.
That all kind of works. I took a networks course in school, and like in some layers, it's almost like spit and duct tape. But like, it works. The other thing that I was reminded of about this whole like making retro web is there is NeoCities. I'm not sure if you've heard of NeoCities. I had a website on GeoCities back in the late 90s.
Oh, I've heard of GeoCities, yeah.
NeoCities is basically, let's do that again. Create a free website, and you've got like a culture here that's, kind of got this retro vibe. of like the early 2000s internet, which I think is pretty cool.
I'm going to have to check that out. I'll put it in the show notes, too, if anybody wants to check it out.
The last thing I'll say is
neocities.org.
The last thing I'll say is GeoCities. I remember creating a website on there, and I would love to have a picture of that website because it had like.
If only we were thinking about the future back then, but we just weren't.
Internet Archive.
It was so tacky though. It was like I replaced your cursor, I think with like the Pokemon Mewtwo, and like had an eyeball that watched. The cursor.
To watch where your cursor went on the page? Yeah.
Were you like
Awesome.
Replacing the text of the status bar with like I remember doing that. You could set window.status to a string and it was like, oh wow.
I don't think that I did that, but like that the internet then was and then we can get off of this, but the internet then was just like so surprising. Like you never knew what you were going to get out of a website. And like, remember falling into like the conspiracy part of like, GeoCities and being like, just so shocked at like things I'd never been exposed to before that suddenly like the internet was like, like the Rothschilds owned everything. And like,
yeah,
but just being shocked by that. Now it's like, not shocking at all to come across content like that, but it was the discovery.
I think it was the discovery, right? It was the discovery element that made that era of the internet so magical. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning into the Retro Internet Podcast. We could do a whole episode about this easily. That much is clear. Okay, Mike, let's get into what you do.
Sure. So as a principal engineer, working on Firefox desktop primarily, my job is to, these days, I'm handed a like very sort of fuzzy or underdefined problem and asked to hammer it into focus and produce a series of potential and practical solutions. We notice that users are having this problem. What are things we can do? Mm-hmm. And it's like a one-person R&D lab sometimes. I'm producing a lot of like proposal documents and planning documents and architectural documents, and then working with teams of developers and designers and testers and product managers to sort of like operationalize some of those things that seem to pass muster. So that's like the sort of the high-level job description. And at a practical level, I still write patches. I live hack on Wednesdays and people still see me working on patches. I'll pick up a bug and try and push on it.
Is that joy of coding?
That's the joy of coding. Yep. Yeah, that's me.
And you might as well just give a shout out for that.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity for the free plug. So the joy of coding is you get to watch me on most Wednesdays, not this Wednesday because I'm doing this. Pleasurably. But like on most Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern, I am live hacking on Firefox. And you can find out more about how to watch that by either following me on Mastodon or the Fediverse, or you can go to mikeconley.ca/JOC. And that's where the streams all kind of go. I multicast to YouTube and Twitch and Air Mozilla and Diode.zone.
I wanted to ask you, Mike, what Firefox feature do you think that most people don't know about and they should?
I've got two off of the top of my head. The first one is picture-in-picture, which I'm very kind of proud of because I worked on the first version of it. These days I don't work on it too much, but I helped get the first version of it out the door. And what it allows you to do, if you're not familiar with it, is it allows you to take a video that's playing in your browser and to pop it out into an always on top window so that you could like switch tabs, move that video player window off to a different display or resize it to however you'd like and watch that video while you do other stuff in the foreground. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is that in Firefox 1.13, which goes out the door next week, we are going to turn on by default a whole new set of controls for it. So up until now, you can do very simple things like play, pause, mute, unmute, and then close the window, and that's it. And next week, for most sites, you'll be able to get like a playhead scrubber, so you can like track around, fast forward, rewind. There's like a forward by some number of seconds, rewind by some number of seconds. Basically, a full-fledged set of player controls are going to be available. And that was an interesting challenge, by the way. And I'm speaking for a team of people who worked on it. I did not really work on this, but I'm very pleased with this team who was working on it. That they had to overcome a challenge where websites will create their own video player mechanisms. Netflix, for example, isn't just a video element. It's like a whole API on top of a video element. And they're doing all this like EME decryption, like content decoding stuff. And so seeking around on a Netflix video isn't as simple as like setting the like playhead on the video element. You actually have to call into a Netflix player, like low client API to make that work. And so what we had to build out was the set of adapters for all sorts of different sites to make this stuff work. And subtitles, we got subtitles to work.
Wow, really?
Yeah. It like opened the floodgates for all this capability. Actually, we started with subtitles. We wanted subtitle support, and we got that working on like, I think it was like Vimeo and Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus and all these things. And then from there, on that foundation, we built up the greater set of controls. So I'm very pleased with that feature. And I, almost out of habit now, will open up a picture-in-picture player window whenever I'm watching a video, just so I can do other things with it. It's not just I want it on top to do other things. I also want to be able to full screen it or resize it or move it to another display. And you can do multiple picture-in-picture. This is unique to Firefox, is that you can have multiple, which is very helpful during like something like March Madness, where maybe you're watching like 3 basketball games at once. You can like...
let me tell you when I finally understood the beauty of Firefox's picture-in-picture was World Cup 2022.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It was a godsend. It was so nice to have that as someone living in Croatia.
If you've ever seen one of those like films where there's a character sitting in front of a whole bank of TVs, they're all showing something different. It's usually a villain, but that's
usually a spy thriller or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can create that experience for yourself. Like you can just sort of like pop out all the videos that you want, arrange them however you'd like. Like we do our best to lay them out properly for you, but like you can resize them and position. And then you can watch 3 games of soccer at the same time.
Okay, totally geeky question here, but have you guys ever tried to really push the limits of how many videos you can pop out until your system just crashes? Does that even happen?
That's a good question. I would imagine it eventually, I think the stress will be on the decoding and the rendering. The actual player windows themselves are very lightweight and don't do much, but what we're having to do is we're telling the Gecko engine, hey, continue to decode these videos for tabs that are in the background. Because normally whenever a tab is in the background, we stop decoding to save resources. And here we're saying, well, this is a special case. We need to keep decoding this so we can still create the video frames and render those frames at 60 frames per second. And so if you do that by however many videos, you're gonna start taxing the media layer the more and more videos you're doing this for. And so I don't actually know what the limits are, but I'd be curious to hear if people make their system fall over.
I'm going to try it for Linux for everyone. It sounds like a blast. It sounds like torture, but also a blast.
I would love to say that picture-in-picture is the most used feature that I use in Firefox. Period. It's ever since it came out, I've just been a power user of it, and there's always a picture-in-picture window present somewhere on my screen. It's a feature that I absolutely love. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Firefox was one of the first, if not the first major browser to roll this out. I don't remember seeing it elsewhere beforehand.
I think the story goes like this. I think WebKit actually introduced a picture-in-picture feature first. They actually had a web API so that they could, I think, have the Safari browser inject a button onto YouTube to open up a top level,
gotcha.
Always on top player.
I do remember seeing it in Epiphany, so I think that checks out.
I think Opera also had it earlier, but I will say, I'm going to flex a little bit. We are certainly best in class in terms of the functionality. Like, we just offer more than what the others can do. We allow the user, for example, to open up most videos in picture-in-picture, and to have multiple player windows and to size them however they want, to full screen them. Yeah, I think we've kind of leapfrogged the competition there, which is nice. One thing we don't do is that we don't expose the web API for sites to open videos in picture-in-picture. And at the time, like, it's possible we will revisit that decision, but at the time, the idea was, well, we don't want sites to necessarily dictate what videos a user can pop out. We want the user to choose. So we offer the toggle on as many videos as we can to give them that capability for the user to choose. And so that's kind of like, there's that philosophical difference, I'd say, between us and the other major browsers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've been super impressed by all of the videos that I can pop out, like even video players where I'm like, no, this isn't going to work. And then it's like, oh yeah, okay, well, it does. So that's super impressive. And I'm very interested in the controls that are coming, the added controls, because scrubbing has been something that right now, you pull up the tab and you kind of control it in the original tab, and, having the ability to do more there.
I think that's one of the other advantages of pip 2 is that sometimes video player sites are full of a bunch of noise that you don't really care about. What you really care about is the video content. And in a way, I've sort of thought of pip as kind of like a reader mode for video, where it's like, okay, just pull out the thing I care about so that I can like consume that part.
I'm guessing that reader mode is your other one.
It's one of the other ones, yeah.
Was that the second one?
Yeah. The other one I'll say is reader mode. So
do you have any? I'm not, and I apologize, I'm not familiar with the kind of telemetry that Firefox uses or doesn't use. But do you have any insight into how many people or what percentage of the user base uses a feature like Reader?
I think we might have some measurement of like user interaction on the on like the click event, or like having the user like invoke the button. Like we will measure. I think we might record that with telemetry, but we know that people use it. I think we don't think enough people know that it exists. That's a hard thing to kind of measure.
Which is probably why it's on your list.
Yeah.
Well, then talk about it. By all means, talk about it. I love it.
There's a balance to be struck here too. Like, we used to have this little panel that would come out to tell users whenever the item, what we call a charm, would appear in the URL bar to enter reader mode. Like, that's your main entry point. And we used to have this panel that would come out for the very first time to say like, hey, did you know that this thing exists? And that drove some traffic, but at the same time, you are getting in the user's way. And, that panel is appearing in front of the user that they have to like do something with, either dismiss it or like follow its directions or whatever. But suddenly you're like throwing something at them when really what they wanted to do was visit a web page.
Yeah, they want to visit a web page, but really they don't want to, right? They want to read the article.
We think, yeah. Yeah.
They want to view the content. They don't want to view the web page.
Yeah, and all of the associated surroundings. Yeah, I mean
that must be for me. It was a total aha light bulb moment when I first used Reader.
Mm-hmm. When it works brilliantly.
Yeah, it does, and especially I can. So I'm one of those weirdos who uses the sepia.
Oh, nice.
Sepia, mm-hmm. Color tone, like, because it just reminds me of like an old fashioned book, But yeah, I love that it just puts the content front and center, and you can adjust it, and it's very, very, very user friendly. But I'm curious about the impact or the potential backlash, maybe, when a browser decides to effectively block ads on a website, which is what Reader does, right? So I'm wondering, has there ever been any backlash from major websites or major content producers about a feature like that?
Not that I'm aware of. I will say that what's happening here is that the user is invoking it. The user has made an intentional choice. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to read this content. I want to read the article. I want some assistance in doing that. And so what the site wants is at that point kind of not a factor. It's the user is choosing, and so we're a user agent.
Right.
We're not the website agent. And you can sort of see that philosophy with picture-in-picture. Like, we are obeying the user, their choice to invoke picture-in-picture, as opposed to a website's choice to to invoke it for the user. And so there's that philosophy at play again of being the user agent. And there's like a balance to be struck there, but we generally try to weigh on the side of, okay, well, what did the user want to do? Let's let them do it.
But I guess when you think about it, at least the way that I use Reader, I mean, when I land on a website, the ad has been served. The ads have been served to me. The view has been counted. And then I click the Reader icon. Right. So the advertiser is still getting their views. So it's kind of a win-win.
Perhaps. I'm not super familiar with how like impressions and ad clicks and all that stuff work.
I'm always thinking about that from like a content producer brain.
Yeah. And to be clear, like we all consume a bunch of free stuff on the internet, and it seems like it's free, but like someone's paying the bills to get this stuff on the internet. So, I mean, some people are paying out of pocket, but oftentimes it's ad supported. And that's an ecosystem that we have to kind of like care about a little bit. Like, yes, I understand that, personally, I'm not the biggest fan of a website being plastered with ads. I think there's a way of doing advertising that's tasteful and, like user centric and, privacy preserving. I think it can be done. I realize that like, people have businesses to run, I get that. And that's why, like, people are showing up and people want free stuff, but at the same time, also other people have to put food on the table and have the time to put that stuff up that is being consumed. So again, a balance to be struck.
Well, Ryan, same question to you, but about Thunderbird. What is a feature or what are features that you think, are really valuable in Thunderbird that most people don't know about?
Honestly, the one I've been thinking about a lot is the PDF editing. So PDF.js is the actual like library that's used to do this, but it exists in both Thunderbird and Firefox. When you open up a PDF, you have the ability to edit it right there. And I think that's just like, especially last week, somebody just sent me an email with a bunch of PDFs that needed like signatures. The Adobe app is like a terrible piece of software, like the Adobe Reader app. And like, it's not simple and it's expensive to actually be able to sign things. And so like just being able to do that in Thunderbird and send those back was amazing. What I would love to see is this is more like a Thunderbird project than a Firefox project, but like the ability to, right now you can sign it, then you have to save it, and then you have to attach it. It'd be great if you could just somehow take that saving step out and reattach it back to like a reply right there. Anyway, that's a feature that most people don't know about, and it's new, fairly new, the ability to sign and fill out those forms. But it's something I've been trying to tell everybody about.
It may have been one of you over like Mastodon that kind of drew my attention to this, but I found out that you can install uBlock Origin in Thunderbird.
Yep, that was me.
Was that you?
That was me.
What a revelation!
I wrote an RSS feature like about how to use RSS properly and efficiently in Thunderbird. How to do like use folders and how to use uBlock Origin to block the ads and all that stuff. So and you know what? This is actually very topical because uBlock is now available on the actual addons.thunderbird.net. Yeah, you can actually get uBlock there as an official extension now. You don't have to go to the GitHub.
That's great. Now, I've only had that installed in Thunderbird for a few days, and so I haven't been doing a whole lot of checking, but I wonder if it's doing like query param, like stripping for like is it doing the work of like stripping all the sort of like marketing tracking in the emails that people are sending me? Like, I'm very curious to know what it's doing. I presume it's blocking, like Thunderbird does a pretty good job of blocking like images that are being used potentially to like verify that I opened an email or something. Like the
pixel tracking,
right? Yeah, I think Thunderbird has that built in. But I suspect that uBlock might be like adding a whole new arsenal of defenses to the toolkit.
So we actually asked our community on Mastodon what they thought was a Thunderbird feature that more people should know about. And I'm going to kick it off with an audio reply.
Hi, this is Lutz from Germany. I really like the Thunderbird feature to archive your messages. Simply hitting the A button on the keyboard will store the current message into the message archive of your identity. You can even customize it to build the archive by year or by month. Really nice. Thanks.
I've got a few more, though, I wanted to mention. Vincent St. Pierre on Mastodon says, I've been using the Messenger feature. I can send Facebook messages through Thunderbird, and I think that's pretty neat. Also, the Send Later feature for when I have a 1 a.m. idea but don't want to subject someone to a notification ping at an unreasonable hour. And then Tim, T-I-I-M at indieweb.social, says the RSS reader. I generally think RSS is very underrated, and Thunderbird has a pretty good reader, and I'm biased, but I have to agree. I really wish we could see a resurgence in RSS as a protocol. I mean, it's never, I don't think it's ever had the visibility that it deserved, even with, you know, the podcast explosion, because people still don't associate RSS with podcasts. They just think, well, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Pocket Cast, it's, you know.
I philosophically love RSS. I'm going to just talk about podcasts for a second, though, since we happen to be on one. Like, that is, like, the standard now for, like, how you get a podcast out there is you use RSS, is my understanding. And that's great. But from the user's perspective, I wonder sometimes if the RSS part isn't, like, this sort of, like, bizarre dance that one needs to do in order to get what they really want, which is the content. They want to listen to the podcast episode. So, for example, I listened to your first episode. I loved it. I loved it. But in order to get to it, I had to go to like the Thunderbird blog and then like copy the link and then paste that into my podcast app on my Android phone, which didn't, I guess my Android podcasting app, which is called, what's it called? Radio Publica.
I don't think that it's listed there in their database for some reason.
Well, it's just a generic like podcast app. It does a good job. And it's got like an index of some popular ones, I think, but it didn't know about the ThunderCast. And so I pasted in the URL and it was like, oh, okay, I found it for you. Let's get it going. And I think that is kind of the hurdle where it's discovery. It's always been discovery. The plumbing is all there, but in order for the site to know, or the application in this case to know about, in this case, the ThunderCast, it needed to know about the RSS feed. Yeah, the bits and pieces for this kind of like you bring your own tools stuff is all there, but it's at like 90%. The last 10% is like the discovery and smoothing that user flow so they don't have to think about RSS. Like I think RSS ideally is one of those things that's almost like TCP/IP. You don't think about it.
I think you're right. I mean, I think that the best technologies are ones that just melt into the background and you don't have to think about, right?
That's been what's maybe the biggest letdown of RSS for me. There was when I started using RSS for websites back leading up to the height of its popularity and all these different RSS readers. I shouldn't say the height of its popularity because it's pretty popular with the use case of podcasts now. But, you know, like I was getting this curated kind of personal news experience. And then the biggest letdown of that was exactly what we talked about with reader mode, which was all these different attempts to make it so that you needed to go to the website to view the page, to see the ads. You know, and you can still see that with many RSS feeds. If you add them to say Thunderbird, like you'll get like the first paragraph and then, you know, a link to the website to view it. And that's kind of the big letdown of RSS for me, because to be able to personalize that news and information experience, what you get from the web, is really powerful, but to have these like limitations put on it really sucks some of the beauty out of it.
Like I use Thunderbird for RSS feeds and specifically for music discovery. I have a subfolder of just music, and it's various music blogs like Stereo Gum or Louder Sound or whatever. And every morning, with my coffee, I'll just open that up and look at all the new listings and listen to everything right from Thunderbird. the best feature about RSS to me is that it's sort of my brain. I don't have to remember to manually go to these 15 different websites whenever I'm seeking new music. It just comes to me. The way that do you guys know Adam Curry and Dave Weiner? You know those names? They were kind of responsible for the original RSS protocol. I only know this because I used to hand code my own RSS feed when I did Insomnia Radio back in 2004. And they advertised it way back then when RSS was this brand new thing as time-shifted radio. I know. I think the title of this episode is going to be something relating to like retro internet because that's where we keep going. But that was such a revelation at that time, right? Because if you wanted to hear a radio broadcast, well, then you better show up when the broadcast is going live. And RSS allowed these types of broadcasts to be delivered to you on your own schedule. And that's how they originally kind of advertised the protocol. And that was magical at the time.
It's so weird to think in terms of that, in terms of the world before kind of really on demand, content like that. It's like, that's the context. They were pitching this around like, you're going to miss the things you want to listen to. This allows you to listen to it, and how hard it would be for, like, I think of people who are just 10 years younger than me to understand that pitch for, this protocol. It's just so, that just tickles my brain.
One of the things I love about RSS is one of the things I love about like things like iframes. Like you can compose the internet. You can sort of like compose different parts of the web to sort of create the heads up display that I want, the news of the day that I want. That is, to me, kind of the power of the web, is these streams of information that I can compose and shape into a tool that's useful for me.
Random geeky question here. Could you technically have like a Linux desktop just full of those iframes?
I don't see why not. Like, basically, just you need a web engine and some UI glue, and you're off to the races.
I wonder if that exists. If that's something that is, something the average, quote unquote, average Linux user could customize on their desktop. Okay, let me read a couple more of these replies from our listeners on Mastodon. I cannot pronounce this name, but it's Klafyvel on Mastodon. Says filters, and I think that Ryan would appreciate this one. I see so many colleagues manually sorting their emails on the uni webmail, and I hurt for them.
That and tags. I say it all the time, but once you start using filters and tags, it's really hard to go back.
Here's another feature that as someone working on Thunderbird or at Thunderbird, I did not know about. Shift plus reply to switch between text and HTML composing. I had no idea. Shift plus reply, and you just toggle back and forth.
I'll add one more trick. If you go to more on an email, and you can go to message body as and change between most emails are original HTML. You can change to simple HTML, which removes some of the fanciness that you might have in an email. But then there's also plain text, which is sometimes really useful if you intend to copy, text out of a message. Sometimes you don't want to carry over the styles, and there are issues with that. And so, but yeah, most users don't know about that. Most of the time they really shouldn't have to know about it, but it's nice if you get an email that we talked about reader mode. You're just like bombarded with like crap, and you can just say, I just want to view this in plain text.
I mean, I don't want to add more to your feature roadmap. I know Supernova is a big deal, but like you could use the reader mode library and add it to this list, like simple plain text reader mode. Like,
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
I'll add a feature that I think not a lot of people know about. This is only because I produced a short video on the Thunderbird channel showing people how they can reorder their accounts for people who use multiple accounts. It's just a matter of pressing the gear on the Spaces toolbar and then going into your account settings. And then, like, for example, I have jason@thunderbird.net, I have Proton Mail, and I have a Gmail account in here. Just dragging one down, dragging one up, dragging them in whatever order you want. And that goes for also your communication accounts like Matrix or your news feeds or anything else. Your local folders, you can drag those into any order that you want.
I didn't even know that was how you could do it.
Right. And it's so easy to do, but it's just not, it's one of those features. It's like I feel like Firefox and Thunderbird both share that that power user mentality where there's so many useful features, but they're just not exposed or not well known or not well advertised or, for whatever reason.
Can I give a shout out as someone who had worked on Thunderbird in like 2010 and 2011? A shout out to all the people who have been like cleaning up the code base and making it easier to work with. I know Alex has been a big part of that, but there's been like a bunch of people throwing themselves at that project. And like, you got off of the Mork database for address book, and and switched over to SQLite, and I'm like, that was one of my like hills that I was trying to climb up whenever I was working on Thunderbird, and someone else pulled it off, and I was just so happy to see all this progress. Like the Thunderbird is getting better. Like I have such a soft spot. It was like my first introduction to open source, and my first gig, my first job was working on Thunderbird. So I have a real soft spot. I still use it. I've got it in front of me right now. And like, I love to see it thrive and improve.
Super eager to see everyone, especially past Thunderbird contributors and in your case, folks who actually worked on it for a job, like the reaction to all the work we've put into Supernova. I think that it's lays out a path for the next 5-10 years of innovation, in Thunderbird and makes it so that we can, not to go too much in the weeds, but just makes it so that there's an strong open source alternative to the other, proprietary email clients that are out there that are popular. I feel like, Thunderbird had a really great role to play, in the internet for such a long time around, use your email the way you want. And by the way, where it's open source so that you can, come and participate and help make the experience better. But it kind of had a few years in the wilderness, and I feel like it's coming back out and going to be able to hopefully create some more stories like yours, Mike, of people who hack on it and kind of learn some skills there and then go on to do amazing things in other software.
I will say, like, there are improvements being made for Supernova that might not be obvious to the end user because it's just all working the same, but like our like huge architectural achievements, the replacement of Zool tree for your like folder list and message list is a very big deal. And like I know Alex talked a little bit about that during the last podcast, and like I really want to underscore how impressive that is as a technical achievement, because as I recall, Thunderbird, it was like this thing that was embedded so deeply into like how the Thunderbird 3-pane system worked, that to tease it out and to sort of like seamlessly, I mean, from my perspective, it was seamlessly, let's swap it with this new implementation is like deeply impressive. It's also going to save us so much headache when we can finally get rid of the Zool tree in the code base, which I know our graphics team on the platform side of things are eager to do.
Also, kudos to the folks who worked on Zool tree and some of that stuff originally, because it is a crazy piece of engineering that is really, really performant.
It's fast. Oh yeah, don't get me wrong, it's fast.
It's been actually a little bit of a challenge for us to there's so much good that our users will get out of the new implementation, but just that performance has been hard to beat. And so, we put a lot of time and effort into trying to continually like meet that high bar that we've provided to our users for so long. But
it's little things too. Like you've got smooth scrolling now. Like getting smooth scrolling to work with Zultree would have been like really, really, really difficult. And you get that for free. Like you get so much for free by using the web primitives that you're using for the new list. And like it's and the platform is there now, right? Like the platform is allowing you to have that performance. So it's like the time was right. You back when I was working on Thunderbird, replacing Zultree with like web stuff was probably not in the cards. It was just like the platform's not ready for it. We're now ready for it and you're doing it. And I'm so happy. And like Mork was another example of this, where the Mork database that powered the address book, super fast, like ridiculously fast and performant. And that's because it was like an in-memory database key value store, but it was also so painful to work on. No one knew how it worked. It was like this Mozilla platform database thing that no one knew how it worked. It's like a holdover from the Netscape days, and like the switch over to SQLite made so much sense. So anyways, all of that to say, like, I don't want to turn this into like a stroke the egos of the engineers or anything, but like, great job. Keep up the refactoring. This is only going to move things faster and make things better in your in the product. I'm
glad you said that though, because for the folks listening, like, we've been trying to get across how much work has gone into, the changes that we've made. And, you see folks who are like, they're afraid of change. And what we're trying to convey is like all this work that we've done is to really just ensure that Thunderbird is a wonderful, stable, client that does what folks expect for the next 10 years. Served you for 15 years. It's time to set us up to be able to serve our users for the next, 10 years. Hopefully we change things more often than that just to keep things up to date. But like, we really want to provide the best in class email experience. And this is going to allow us to do that. So thanks for saying that, Mike.
Well, it's like, it's the equivalent in my mind anyways of like, if you've got a whole bunch of people living in a house or like an apartment building and it's on the edge of an eroding cliff, and the work that's underway is moving that entire apartment complex to a better place, replacing the foundation, replacing the plumbing because it's all like lead pipes, replacing all the electrical because it's knob and tube, and doing it while people are still living in the building and they don't even really know what's happening. Like in the end, they're still living in their place and it should hopefully be more or less the same. Maybe there are a couple more plugs in the room and maybe they've got ground. Yeah. That's nice. And they look out the window and that like eroding cliff is gone. But like the architectural and engineering achievement to do that is like chef's kiss.
But we want to talk about specifically, we kind of know what you do from a top-down view, but what are the specific projects that you're working on right now for Firefox?
So one of the things that I've been doing with a couple of other colleagues is work with a set of students from Cal State LA. It's a school in Los Angeles in the United States, and there's 10 students that we've been working with since September to improve the migration experience in Firefox. And by migration experience, I mean the mechanism that you use to import data from other browsers on the same computer. And so historically, we've had like the same migration experience since like Firefox 1, which is this like native Zool dialog that comes up and you choose like a list of browsers from a radio group and then, choose the profiles you want to import from, choose the resources. And that really has not changed much from a user's perspective. And it is long overdue for kind of an overhaul and a new coat of paint. Not only because we want to, refresh the look of it, but also we can make it much more efficient and easier for users. One of the things that we've learned over time is that if you overwhelm users with like lots of checkboxes and big lists, then like there's a certain proportion of users that are just going to go like, nope, not interested, and close right out. And so what we're trying to do is do our best to show the user a dialogue that more or less gets the defaults right right off the bat. Like the new migration wizard that we're working on will show, instead of a long list of browsers that you can import from with the radio group, it's just a drop down list with the icon of the browser that is associated.
Okay, that's a big deal. That visual association.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Visual association, nice label there of what the browser is. In the same label, it's like, and this profile. And we show, by default, the one that was most recently used.
Oh, that's smart. So does it include less popular browsers like maybe Opera?
It has Opera. The students shipped an Opera migrator earlier in, I think it was actually late 2022 or early 2023. I think those.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
because I don't remember seeing Opera personally when I made that switch on a.
It's relatively recent, and these students have been working on a bunch of different aspects of the migration experience, from like adding new migrators for Opera, I think Opera GX, and fixing up some old migrators. Like there was some stuff broken with like the old Internet Explorer migrator. There's been a bunch of sort of like revitalization of that part of the code base and more rigorous testing, and cleanup effectively. And then there's the new dialogue. And the dialogue just makes it easier for users to select the browser, choose the things they want to pull in, and then get to the end. Because honestly, this is not a dialogue we expect many users to want to stay around in. We're not trying to build out an experience where it's like, yeah, we really want like a true experience through this dialogue. We want you to get in and get out so you can like get the stuff that you needed from those other browsers and then get going.
Thank you. Like I know that people are going to say, well, you work for Thunderbird, so of course you're going to say this. But I've usually been pretty transparent about my opinions of software, and I like Edge. I like Microsoft Edge. I like a lot of the functionality that browser has. But one of the things I dislike, and this is true across the entire Microsoft portfolio, it seems like an endless stream of screens that you have to go through when even when Edge updates, or when you first use Edge. It's all of these options, these full screen, takes over your entire desktop, and it's like, well, do you want to do this? 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 No, I just want to go to the website that I wanted to visit. Yeah. Right. So I appreciate any steps that save the user time.
Yeah, trying to get out of the user's way. Like this dialogue is not in love with itself. It's not like really trying to like be the thing for everyone that's like, yeah, love me. It's like choose what you want and then get out so that you can just start browsing the internet. And the other thing that we did was we made it so that the dialogue can be embedded in more contexts. Right now, like the migration wizard in Firefox that ships today opens up in a top-level window. We're allowing that ability as well in certain scenarios. We might want to have it as a top-level window, but we are also wanting to like embed it within About Preferences, which is like the settings page of Firefox. And we also want to be able to embed that wizard inside of like the onboarding. Right now, whenever you're onboarding, when you start up Firefox, maybe a brand new install or something, it will walk you through like importing from another browser, setting as default, pinning to your taskbar, all these different things. And whenever you choose to import, it's got to open up that old school Zool dialog on top of everything. And what we're building out will allow you to have that import wizard baked into the page itself. So you don't have to leave the sort of the flow of getting set up. You can just kind of like, yep, I want to import the stuff. Okay, it's done and set to default and I'm done. Now I can start browsing the internet. And so the more we can kind of grease these wheels and really make this flow of getting what you need so that you can get going nice and smooth, the better, like, because that's one of the things that we've discovered, I think, is that those first few interactions with the browser where the user is like a blank slate. The browser doesn't know anything about you. We don't have any history. You don't have any bookmarks, don't have passwords. We know nothing about you. But those first few touch points of the browser talking to the user saying like, hi, do you want to like import some stuff, are really, really important for a user to make a decision on whether or not they're interested in having this be the browser for them, their default or their secondary or whatever.
Right. Because there have to be thousands of users who just download and install Firefox out
just
of curiosity.
To see. Yep.
Right. What's the competition
exactly.
like? Let's find out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and that's where we're putting a lot of attention right now, is trying to make those first few hours, the minutes, seconds, and hours of using the browser as like smooth and helpful as possible. And there's that tricky balance of wanting to be assistive and helpful and also just getting out of the way, and letting the user browse the internet and use it as the tool. And so there's a lot of experimentation going on. One of the things I'm most excited about is how we are kind of getting good at science, doing experiments. Like, back when I was working on Thunderbird and then initially working on Firefox in like the mid 2010s, we would like build a thing. We'd spend months working on it. We'd ship it. And our measuring tool of like whether or not it succeeded was basically watching the tech press and seeing like, did people like it? I don't know. Now we can do basic science of, here's two different variations, two different treatments of the migration wizard where we like maybe have the list of resources expanded by default, or maybe it's collapsed, but it tells you a summary of what's in there. And we can test these two and see how users respond to it. We can use usertesting.com to like get impressions from real people on the internet of like, yeah, that makes sense to me, or like, I'm confused. And then we can use data to basically back up whether or not which one users tend to prefer, which ones do they succeed at their task with. And we're getting good at that. And I'm really excited about that.
It's tricky to use a small subset of users to I guess, estimate what your broader, more mainstream user base will think about a feature.
That's absolutely true.
This is interesting because at LAS, which is the Linux App Summit, Thunderbird sponsored it, and I attended and I had an absolute blast. There was someone from Canonical who did a case study on the Firefox Snap. Mm-hmm. And they showed all the steps that they took to troubleshoot the startup time and to improve it. And long story short, they ended up improving the entire Snap ecosystem. But what really resonated with me is there's a quote, and he said, when you have your early testers, your early adopters, they are more sympathetic to your cause. And while they do discover problems, they are blind to what normal users will see.
Absolutely.
And he was talking about, when Ubuntu 21.10 launched, that's when the Firefox Snap debuted. Mm-hmm. And that, as you might know, is I think it's an 8-month support window. So it's sort of a beta of the LTS of Ubuntu, which is the long-term support of Ubuntu. So they had almost no feedback.
Scary.
But when 22.04 launched, which is the long-term support version, the feedback was constant and it was negative. And I was in that talk and I said, well, is it just because, Ubuntu LTS has more users? And they said, well, no, it's because your early testers, your beta testers are more sympathetic to your cause. And they're not going to call out the same problems that your average user will.
It's selection bias, absolutely. Like our nightly population is not representative of the release population. Our beta population, I would say, is not a very good representation of the release population simply by selection bias. People who are comfortable running like a browser are not your typical user. Same with ones who are...
They're living kind of dangerously.
Exactly. And Thunderbird, like, who's out there running beta versions of email software? Like, there's people, I'm one of them, but I don't think I'm a typical user.
Tens of thousands,
apparently. But is...
Right now, that's kind of cool, but it's not...
But it's not millions and millions and millions, right? Like, so you're going to get these selection biases. So you have to kind of, like, tune your model to have that sort of understood. Like, yes, we can put things in front of our nightly population, but let's caveat this. This is our nightly population. It is skewed. Same with beta. It is skewed. And over time, you learn how they're skewed so that you can try and correct for it.
You're still obviously going to get very, very valuable feedback from that.
Sure. Absolutely. But, even just the simplest things like the hardware profile of people on nightly is vastly different from people who are running.
Really? Talk about that a little bit.
I believe nightly users tend to be running more powerful hardware. And that's probably because they're like enthusiasts who care about, like, there's almost certainly a set of users on our release population who think of computers as an appliance. Like, I got this 5 years ago and it's still working. And so I run it and I use the internet. I go to my Facebook and like I do my banking and whatnot. And like that works for them and that's great. But the people who are on nightly, I would imagine, and I think we've more or less determined, these are people who like care a lot about testing and like they are comfortable going to Bugzilla and filing bugs and trying stuff out, flipping prefs.
Let's give those people a whole lot of respect. That's not an easy, straightforward task.
Yeah. And like,
thank you to all the, not just the testers, but the people who actually take the time to submit a bug.
And getting through Bugzilla. Yeah. Thank you so much. We really rely on that stuff, but that population is also skewed. You know, you're not going to get bugs filed from people who are running maybe an old Acer laptop from 2015 that, you know, like is still running Windows 7 and is still working. And, you know, this person doesn't know or care about updating because they're just like, my computer works. Why would I?
Which means they're not going to be as sensitive to a long startup time for Firefox.
Maybe. Yeah. So it's that sort of stuff that I think we've actually gotten a lot better at. Just science. I think we're getting better at science, which is nice.
Firefox. We're better at science. All right. So the other one, the other project, you've got browser migration, but then you also have device migration.
Yeah, this is a thing we've started to invest in because we suspect that there are users that need to be able to move from old computers to new computers. When you think about how the experience on, say, Windows, doing that is actually really difficult. Mac OS ships with something called the Migration Assistant, which does a pretty good job, actually, of getting stuff from an old computer to a new computer. You can do it with a cable. You can do it over the internet, you know, over the local network.
And same with even if you want to switch phones between iOS and Android.
Yeah, cable, boom, like everything moved over. It's seamless. On a Windows machine and maybe even a Linux machine, I've never done a Linux like migration. I've always just updated the same machine I'm running Linux on again and again and again and again. But like migrating from an old computer to a new computer on Windows, I did that for my mom over the winter holiday, and it was like pulling teeth. Like I thought I was going to do it for a couple of hours. I was up until like 4 a.m. trying to get all her stuff over to the new computer because I had to go hunt it all down. And it's not just like browser stuff, but it's like all the applications she cares about, all the photos, all the documents, all the recipes, all the X, Y, and Z, you know, finding all those myriad of places and moving them over and getting the applications installed and finding all of the registration keys. And like all of this stuff was such a nightmare. And I realized when I was moving Firefox over, like I was going through some of our documentation, there are a couple of ways you can do it. One is like you can export the profile folder and like write that to a jump drive and put it onto another computer. Mm-hmm. That is a lot to ask of a user to like go into this arcane folder on your computer that you've never visited, copy this multi-gigabyte file onto a jump drive that hopefully you have. It has all of your passwords in it.
And hopefully it's formatted properly.
Yeah. Get it onto your new computer, create a new profile on the new Firefox and then replace that profile. Like it's bananas. Like the series of steps that a user has to go through to do this is too much. It's too much to ask for them. That's not to say that some people don't successfully do it. Some do, but I think there's more we can do here. And one of the things that we're trying to encourage is using Firefox in sync.
Please use it because
it's the best. And it takes care of so much for you. And you create a Firefox account. It's free. If you're worried about, I don't want Mozilla to have all my bookmarks and passwords, guess what? We can't read them even if we wanted to, and we don't want to. But even if we wanted to, we couldn't because it's all client-side encrypted end to end. So all we get is an encrypted blob, and that is like what powers what I think is like kind of the ideal migration flow. Is you just download Firefox on the new computer, install it, sign in, and all your stuff's there.
I can't tell you how many times I have done this in the last year because I test a lot of Linux distros and I reinstall Windows frequently, and you know, it's a login. Mm-hmm. That's it. Like, and the majority of our work these days, I can't speak for everyone, but the majority of my work exists on a browser.
Yep.
And it's literally just a login with Firefox Sync to get up and running again on a brand new computer or a brand new OS install.
And one of the nice things about that too is it takes there's a certain condition that a user might be in where they don't actually have access to the old computer anymore. And so they can't do the profile folder like jump drive swap, or they can't do like the exporting of the passwords. Like maybe their computer broke and that's why they got a new computer. Maybe it fell down the stairs. Maybe it fell in the ocean. Maybe in order to use the new computer, they have to disable the old one because they're moving their monitor, keyboard, and mouse over. And so they can't use them at the same time. Like there's a lot of different conditions that a user might be in. And Firefox accounts takes care of all of them basically because yeah, you could sign in and sync on the old machine and then just throw that machine into the lake.
Don't do that though. Recycle it.
Please don't do that. Please, that's not an endorsement for throwing computers into the lake. But then you, like months later, weeks, days, hours, or minutes, or seconds later, you can sign in on the new computer and all your stuff's there. And I think that's what we're trying to encourage people in this situation to do because it's honestly the simplest, least error prone. Even moving profiles between computers, like, yes, that there's a Sumo document that talks about it, but I mean, how often is that really tested?
It can be problematic. I mean, I told you a minute ago that I frequently switch computers, and so I rely on Firefox Sync. Well, if only I had Thunderbird Sync, which is happening.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
I'm so excited about that. As much as I switch computers and switch installs. It might not happen immediately with the Supernova launch, but it will happen in that release cycle. And if you have multiple machines, even if you're not moving to a new computer, if you want to install Thunderbird on a second machine, a third machine, then guess what? All of your account information, your filters, most of your major preferences, they all get synced. And so if you realize, this happens to me all the time, Mike, where I realize, you know what, I need a filter for this situation. Anytime I get this particular email from Bugzilla, I need it to filter into this folder. And I don't want to do that again on the other two machines that I have Thunderbird installed on. So once Thunderbird Sync comes along, it's just instant. And of course, that's only possible because of Firefox.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always like this kind of like buddy cop handshake, like high five with an explosion in the background going on between Firefox and Thunderbird.
And then the nice thing is when Canine Mail becomes Thunderbird for Android and Thunderbird for iOS,
sign into your Thunderbird account and you're good to go. Oh, see, like all jigsaw falling into place.
So that's going to do it for episode 2 of the ThunderCast. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thanks to Mike Conley for joining us and for adding his perspective to everything. Consider this door wide open for you to come back anytime.
Well, thanks for having me.
Hopefully you guys will enjoy what's coming up. We've got guests like Mike Saunders with the Document Foundation. Of course, that's LibreOffice. We have Heather Ellsworth of Canonical. We have Teeb from Matrix, and we have our very own Ketty from Canine Mail and the upcoming Thunderbird for Android. If this is the first time listening to the ThunderCast, you can get it at this point pretty much on every major podcast client except for the one that Mike uses. So if you don't have it in your podcast client, just go to blog.thunderbird.net and look for the podcast episode, and we'll have an RSS link that you can add to the client of your choice, or even add to Thunderbird if you want to. Mike, where can everyone follow you?
So yeah, I'm on the Mozilla instance of Mastodon. So I'm at mozilla.social/mconley. That's where I do a lot of nattering about things. And if you're interested in the joy of coding, I've dropped some links into the show notes document here with what you need to know about that. And I also have a blog at mikeconley.ca.
Links to all these things will be in the show notes at blog.thunderbird.net or in your podcast client. And until next time, thank you very much for listening. Thanks for using Thunderbird, and you all take care and take care of each other.